everyone. Welcome to our Instagram Q&A. I will begin in a few seconds. I just want to give everyone a chance to join in, but in the meantime, I will introduce myself. So I'm Janita, the chapter leader of Future Lawyers Halifax. I am going into my 5th year of a Bachelor of Commerce program at St. Mary's University. I am majoring in economics. And I'm super excited to be able to host a Q&A today with our guest speaker, Cydney Kane. So I'll just tell you a little bit more about Cydney. So Cydney Kane is an associate lawyer with Burchells LLP in downtown Halifax. She attended Mount Allison University and graduated with distinction in 2017 with a Bachelor of Science. She next attended Dalhousie University's Schulich School of Law and graduated with her JD in 2020. While in law school, Cydney held the position of vice president at the student life of the Dalhousie Law Student Society. She coordinated a pro bono clinic to help women apply for criminal record suspension and worked part-time as a dance instructor. So in her final year at Dal, Cydney represented Dalhousie at the National Laskin Moot competition and spent a semester working at the Dalhousie Legal Aid Clinic. So I would now like to welcome Cydney to join. If everyone could just give us a few seconds to get that set up. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, just leave them in the chat below and we will get to them at the end. Hello, Cydney.
Hi, Janita. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Awesome. Great. Thanks so much for being here with us today and welcome.
My pleasure.
So I'll just dive right in and get started with some of the questions I prepared. So as I mentioned earlier, you graduated with a Bachelor of Science and decided to go to law school afterwards. So I'm curious to know, what made you interested in pursuing law as a career?
Yeah, so I guess I took what's not necessarily considered a very traditional path to law school. But I think I kind of came out of high school not really knowing what I wanted to do, and I felt at the time that a Bachelor of Science might give me a few more options. But law was more something I kind of fell into instead of something that I had sort of always planned of doing. I guess I was finishing up my undergrad. I didn't really have any specific plans in mind. And I kind of figured that maybe law would be a good fit for my skill set because I like reading and writing and speaking in public and things like that. So I kind of decided to give it a try. My mom had always wanted me to be a lawyer. And we never want to do what our parents want us to do, right?
Right.
So yeah, it was more something that I sort of ended up doing rather than had always planned to do. But I'm actually pretty glad that I took this path.
That's awesome. That's good to know. Yeah, so how was your law school experience before and after the pandemic? Because I know you graduated in 2020.
Yeah, obviously it looked pretty different. For most of law school, you basically go to lectures. So most of your courses will be lecture format. Depending on which law school you go to and which courses you take, that might vary a little bit. You might have some courses that are more participatory, or you might have some courses that sort of incorporate a bit of an experiential learning component. Like, for example, at Dow, we had a civil trial practice course, which was focused on going through the different stages of a civil trial and learning what those steps look like and how to prepare for oral discoveries or how to do a cross-examination, things like that. So when COVID hit, I was actually doing a semester at the Dalhousie Legal Aid Clinic. So instead of being in regular lectures, it was kind of like I was working. So I was with other law students as well as lawyers who supervised us at the clinic. And we were basically just practicing law while supervised, of course. And COVID threw a pretty big wrench into that, obviously.
Imagine.
Yeah, when things sort of first started happening, many people, obviously, court appearances were canceled, and a lot of our time then was sort of spent figuring out with our clients what to do if we had no access to the courts, because initially we really didn't. And then once a month or two passed, we sort of were able to figure out with the courts, okay, how do we do things virtually? How do we file documents? How do we sort of deal with this new reality? And that has happened. Like we have made some adaptations. In a lot of ways, things are starting to go back to normal. We're starting to see some more in-person hearings, which is awesome. But I think some of the things that we saw, sort of the shift to a more virtual aspect, might stick around. It might be that we continue to do some of the shorter, sort of quick little chambers hearings over phone. It's hard to say at this point, but I think there's some interest in that. Kind of like how people are interested in continuing with telehealth appointments in Nova Scotia, where you can see your family doctor over the phone. I think COVID has kind of shown us that there are some options here. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that sort of pans out.
Yeah, I'm also very excited to see. I love the idea of, going, uh, things going a little bit more virtually and using technology to kind of speed up certain processes. And I know the legal industry can be very, old-fashioned at
Yeah,
times, using a lot of paper. When
definitely.
we have so many opportunities at our fingertips with technology, and so I think I'm very excited to I'm gonna keep an eye out and see.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Like I know British Columbia, for example, some courts will accept some documents submitted electronically. Like you just go on a website and upload your document. So that would be awesome. Or people being able to testify via Zoom so they don't have to travel from wherever if they're somewhere else in the province or elsewhere, for example. Like there's lots of opportunity here. So hopefully we'll be able to capitalize on that now.
Yes, hopefully. So in law school, I know it can, I've heard that law school can be very challenging. What advice do you have for students who are looking to manage their everyday life in law school, and maybe if you have any tips on managing mental health, if you struggled with that during law school?
Sure. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is really just to not compare yourself to what other students are doing, because law school in a lot of ways is sort of set up to have you compete. Um, Depends where you go and what you're doing, but for example, you're marked on a bell curve, for example. So you are marked compared to other students, or job opportunities. You're, struggling against your classmates for those. So in a lot of ways, law school makes you feel like you have to pay attention to what other people are doing. And that's really not productive a lot of the time. Like people compare study tactics, but whatever got you through your undergrad, chances are that that'll help you get through it, get through law school the same way. Um, and I would catch myself often comparing my study habits or the time I spent studying to my classmates. Um, and I had to keep taking a step back and figuring out, like, this is what's working for me. This has worked so far. Like, it's not worth my time and my energy and my mental health to worry about what other students are doing. And then sort of a bigger picture is, it's pretty cliche, but you actually do have to make time for yourself. And you have to figure out what that looks like for you. So for me, that was doing a lot of extracurriculars because I love that stuff, as well as going out with my friends and my classmates at least once a week, going to a bar and hanging out and talking about things other than law school. That was really important for me, but I know for a lot of people, it's, they want to get to the gym every day, or they want to get an extra hour of sleep, or it makes them feel better to know that they're totally caught up on their readings every night. Like whatever it is that works for you, you really have to go for it and not worry about what other people are doing the whole time.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. Thanks for that. But do you have any advice for students transitioning from their undergrad to law school? So I know you mentioned you kind of it fell into your lap like law school. You didn't really know. So what is maybe something students can do to kind of learn more about the legal industry and kind of prepare them a little bit more about what law school might be like or what practicing law looks like too?
I remember when we were getting ready to start law school, a bunch of my classmates, we started like a Facebook group before we actually got started, and people were posting and looking for advice on what should I read before the semester starts? Like, what books do I have to read? Should I try to get a head start on my readings, or should I do this and should I do that? And the advice from upperclassmen was always no. Like, enjoy your summer before you start law school. Don't worry about trying to get ahead. Um, but on the flip side of that, it's always really good to have a sense of, what practicing law actually looks like. And some of the best ways to do that are not watching Suits. Um, one thing that's really cool in non-COVID times, and hopefully we get back to this soon, is that courts are actually public. So
Yeah.
oftentimes, when we're not in the throes of a pandemic, there's nothing really stopping you from going down to the courthouse and sitting in on a hearing for a little while. Obviously, we can't do that right now, but in other times, that's an option for students. Um, if you know lawyers, you can talk to lawyers and get a sense of what their practice is like, because it's so different between lawyers and between different law firms or different areas of the law that they practice. Um, you can read papers that lawyers have written or articles on law firm websites, or you can follow legal advocacy groups on social media and see what they're up to. Or the Canadian Bar Association has a lot of cool articles that they're always putting out. And they also have different sections within the CBA that touches on different areas. So you can sort of poke around and see what you're interested in. And often there are speaker series and conferences that are totally open to the public, whether they're hosted by the Canadian Bar Association or different law schools. And one of the cool thing about COVID is that most of those are held virtually right now, and people are often happy to let you join in from wherever you are, even if you're not a student or a member or whatever. So there's lots of opportunities right now that we didn't necessarily have before too, in that way.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree. Like how I learned a lot about the legal industry and what it's like to be a lawyer through like just free virtual events online. You can find a lot, especially like at the peak of 2020. I think there was a lot, and I was just like joining in on these random Zoom calls and like just listening in, learning. But I think something else that you could maybe try, which is something I've done. I don't have any personal connections to any lawyers, and I know you mentioned you also never knew a lawyer before getting into
Yeah,
it.
that's right.
Um, something you can do is maybe create a LinkedIn account and reach out to lawyers in Halifax. I know like maybe not everyone will respond, but there are definitely some people who will respond and answer your questions or chat with you or meet with you virtually for a few minutes. I know I've done that, and people are very responsive to that. Most people. So yeah, I highly recommend anyone who's interested in law. If you want to learn more, definitely reach out and speak to people.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Janita. And if folks wanted to message me on LinkedIn, I'd obviously be happy to chat as well.
Yeah, awesome. Um, so is there anything in the work field that has been different from your studies?
A lot. So law school is not necessarily like other professional programs. So you think about engineering or medicine or nursing or pharmacy or any of those, and often your courses or your practicums or your placements are really focused on the skills you'll actually use in the workplace. And law school is not like that at all. Law school is very academic, it's very theoretical, it's about concepts and principles, as opposed to how do you file a notice of action in the court, and how do you draft a subpoena, and how do you deal with clients, how do you manage trust accounts. So there's a lot of things about law school that don't prepare you for what the law actually looks like, which is one of the reasons we have, after you graduate law school, you have to complete a year of what's called articling. And it's kind of like an internship. So you've already graduated, but you have to do this year before you're actually called to the bar and become a lawyer. And the idea behind that is so you can develop the skills and knowledge to actually practice as a lawyer. So that's the reason we have that kind of in-between piece. But it's totally different all the time. I'll say like, oh, I wish we had learned this in law school, like sending a fax,
Yeah.
for example, fighting with the fax machine or whatever it is. So there's a lot of things that are really different from law school, and oftentimes you sort of have to refocus your brain and fight your instincts from law school, which might be very theoretical or something that's been drilled into you that maybe your law firm doesn't practice or whatever. So there's a lot of shifting, but that's one of the benefits of the articling year is that you can get used to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really good that they have the articling year to kind of, put your foot in and kind of get a sense of how things work. But what do you wish you had known before going into law school?
Oh, I wish there's so much, if I'd known the basics of a contract, maybe that would have helped. No, but in all seriousness, I guess I would have liked to have known, I guess a little bit about, I would have liked to have known not to compare myself to other people ahead of time and sort of focused on that. I think I would have liked to have known that practicing law is a lot different from law school. It's a lot different than how it is on TV. And maybe I would have liked to have known like all the options that are out there. Like so many people think that the only path is to get a law degree, become a lawyer, and go work on Bay Street in Toronto. And that's not true at all. Like many people with law degrees don't become lawyers even. Many don't article and get called to the bar. Many practice for a couple of years and then leave to do something totally different. They work in policy or they become professors or there's so much. They become academics. And I have a friend, for example, who is leaving the law completely and going into music. Like,
Oh, wow.
yeah, the possibilities really are endless. So you don't necessarily have to feel like you have to take the traditional path. And right now, I guess I'm sort of on that traditional path and I'm really liking it. But I also know people who are doing a lot of cool and different things. So I think getting a sense of what the practice of law might actually look like, maybe what you're interested in, but also you don't have to worry about, having your career charted out by any means. I changed my mind about what I wanted to do 5 times, and I know I'm not alone in that. So there's no pressure in that way too. Like the best advice I could give would be, before going into law school or applying or whatever, just be curious. Try to be a sponge and learn as much about the legal profession or what you might like, because it might give you a sense as you go in. But then on the flip side, be really open-minded as well, because you might take a course or meet a lawyer or talk to a professor and it totally changes your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally relate to that. I change my mind all the time about what I want to do. Literally every day, like one day I might say I want to, be a lawyer. Next day I might say I want to be a doctor. So,
Totally.
yeah, it's nice. Like the law degree, you can really do a lot with it. It's really versatile. So,
Absolutely.
you know, you most likely won't regret,
Yeah.
regret
I
it.
guess the flip side, I would also caution like it's a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I, for example, went right out of my undergrad, but I don't think people should feel pressured to do that. Like if you want
Yeah.
to try a career first, maybe work alongside lawyers and do something else, then that's also a great idea.
Yeah, that is a very good idea as well, I think. Um, so how has the pandemic affected law in Halifax based on, what you've seen so far?
For the most part, things have been primarily virtual. If we're having court hearings or client meetings or mediations or whatever, a lot of that is happening virtually. When it's happening in person, there's requirements around spacing out, wearing masks, etc. The There's been a lot of challenges in terms of every time there's like a shutdown or a new wave, the court having to adjust what it can and can't do. Sometimes it's we're only taking urgent matters or emergencies or what have you. So a lot of things have changed. And I think the pandemic has also shifted people's perspectives in a lot of ways. Um, and for example, the housing market exploded here. So the real estate lawyers at my firm have had a really busy year, which no one was expecting when the pandemic hit. So they've at times been the busiest lawyers. And then if we were in the middle of a big wave and the courts were mostly shut down, then the litigation lawyers had their hands tied in a lot of ways. So they would often sort of take a step back. But I think it's been really interesting to sort of watch the shifts happen. And my hope is that, as we kind of mentioned earlier, like maybe we'll embrace technology a lot more going forward, which is great. But there's also a lot of things that I think are really important to have in-person contact with as well. It's great to be able to see your clients in person. And it's great to be in front of a judge and be able to feel out from their body language where their head might be at and what you might need to say differently to sort of get them on your side. And some of those things are really hard virtually. So there have been a lot of changes, but they haven't all been bad.
Yeah, I think that's good to know. I've definitely been curious to kind of see what's going on. Everything's kind of been changing, including the legal industry.
Yeah.
So what areas of law or areas of law do you work in, and can you tell us like a little bit more about that?
So I'm primarily a civil litigation lawyer. So what that means is what you think of in terms of lawsuits, for example. So the people who are filing lawsuits or defending lawsuits or engaging in alternative dispute resolution, which is things like mediations or arbitrations to sort of go outside the court system, things like that. So I do most of that work is mostly what I do. I also do some family law, which I wasn't sure I'd like. Obviously, there's a lot of drama and high emotions, but I actually really like that about family law because it feels very human to me. So I like the opportunity there to be creative and sort of drive at what your client's real interests are. And then I also sometimes will dabble a little bit in other areas. Like sometimes I help out on a couple real estate files, or I do some wills and estates on my own as well. Where you're a junior lawyer, like it's always good to be flexible and help out, when a body is needed. When you're articling, you'll sort of be expected to do a variety of things, like whatever your firm practices. And some people who, if you're doing your articles somewhere that only does criminal law, for example, the Bar Society might actually require you to do a secondment somewhere else to get exposed to corporate commercial or whatever. So the idea is that you get exposed to a lot of different things. But then once you're a lawyer and as your career progresses, often you'll start to narrow in on something that you like and develop a specialty. And that's certainly the case at bigger firms. If you're at a really small firm or you work in a rural part of the province, then you might have to do a little bit more of everything. But right now, that's what I'm doing is civil litigation for the most part. And I like it a lot. It's problem solving and advocacy and working with clients. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, that does sound really cool, and it's nice you kind of get exposed to more than just one area of law,
Yeah.
to help you kind of figure out what your niche might be, or maybe not niche. Maybe you want to work on a bunch of different things.
Yeah, totally. And what's cool about litigation too is it actually encompasses a lot of things. So at our firm, for example, that could be banking, or that could be insurance defense, or that could be, a fight over property, or a corporate commercial dispute, or, what have you. There's a ton of variety even within that. So you get to learn about a bunch of different things in civil litigation. Like I have learned about building decks, hardwood floors, mortgages, like there's so much variety, and medical conditions. Like There's so much to learn in litigation, which is really cool. People can fight about anything.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true. Um, so considering like you kind of dabble in a lot of different areas, what does a typical work day look like for you?
So my days vary a lot. And I think that's more true of litigators than it would be for someone who practices mostly transactional law, like real estate or corporate commercial. But my day could be anything from answering a ton of emails, taking a ton of phone calls. It could be meetings with other lawyers in the firm on a file, or it could be meeting with clients to sign documents or discuss strategies. It could be a quick little hearing. It could be a whole day hearing as part of a larger proceeding. It could be a mediation with another side to see if we can negotiate a settlement. It could be last week I went to a foreclosure sale and represented a bank. Like there's so much variety. Every day can look really different. Now, most of my days I will spend answering emails, taking phone calls or making phone calls, and drafting documents. And sometimes as part of drafting documents, there's research involved. That's what most of my time looks like, especially as a junior lawyer. But there, within that, there's still variety. So there's usually something different going on every day, which is cool. So I always make sure at the beginning of the day, like I really take a moment to take stock of what absolutely has to get done that day, what commitments I have, and then slot in all my other tasks around that.
Yeah, I think that is really exciting. Like, your days kind of, you don't know what to expect when you go in every day. It's kind of nice to have, not just like the same mundane tasks all the time.
Right.
But you have a little bit of variety sometimes. That's nice.
Totally.
So how many hours a day do you work? And do you have like a good work-life balance? How is that like for you?
So I like to think I have a pretty good work-life balance. I am pretty involved in things outside of work. I sit on a couple of boards, and I also like to maintain a pretty active social life. And like everyone else, I have an unhealthy addiction to streaming shows. Disney Plus, Netflix, Crave, whatever. So one thing that's kind of interesting about being a lawyer is that some days you work a ton, and then some days you might not have to work a whole lot. Like it could be, a 6-hour day, it could be a 16-hour day. Like it totally depends sometimes on what you have going on.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of have to ride the ebbs and the flows of your workload, especially if you're doing something like litigation where you might have big hearings coming up, for example, that take up a ton of your time and attention. But one of the coolest things about being a lawyer is that, or at least a lawyer in a law firm, it's not always the case in government or other jobs, but we often have a lot of flexibility. So if I have to show up late or take off early because I have an appointment or whatever, that's not a big deal. And if it's a gorgeous day outside and I don't have a big client meeting or a deadline or anything else that I absolutely have to get done, I might leave a little early, like at 4 o'clock, and go catch drinks with my coworkers. Like, yeah, it can be really, really nice. Like that aspect is really cool, having that flexibility. So really, in most private law firms, you have hours targets or billable targets to meet. You might have to meet a certain amount of hours, or you might have to produce enough work to generate so much money for the firm. And often the focus is more on, are you meeting your targets rather than, is she in her desk at 8:30 every morning? Like that's not as important in this field, which is also really nice.
That is really refreshing to hear because I feel like every time you hear about lawyers, you're like, they work crazy hours every day. It's very
Yeah.
difficult to have this, good work-life balance. So, I mean, it's really refreshing to hear that from someone
Yeah.
that's
And there's
able
a lot
to
of days where that's true. Like
yeah,
a lot of the time that is true. I could be at the office really late because there's something I absolutely have to get done, but that's not every day. And
right.
it depends where you are, which law firm or what workplace and what you're doing. Like there's a ton of variety. So there's opportunities out there for a bunch of different lifestyles. And it's really about finding a fit that sort of works for you and what you want out of your life and your time. I think that's really important.
For sure, I completely agree. So yeah, that's all the questions I have for you, but I will open the floor to the audience. If anyone has any questions, just leave them in the chat below, or I think there is also a Q&A section where you can ask it in the questions. Just give people a few seconds. So it says many
We've got
students.
2 questions about the LSAT.
Everyone's wondering about the LSAT.
Yeah, no, that's a great thing because we haven't really talked about that.
Yeah.
So it's funny because that feels like so long ago for me now. The LSAT is strange, and I found it particularly difficult to study for the LSAT and get ready for the LSAT because I was coming from a science perspective. So a lot of the times in science degrees, it's more concrete answers like the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and it's studying and memorizing facts and whatever. But the LSAT is very different. Like it's more about learning how to think a certain way and deliver a certain type of answer. Um, there are lots of prep courses out there that can teach you how to work through certain problems. For me, the hardest part was the logic games. Um, Assuming it still works the same, there's like logic games and reading comprehension and something else I'm forgetting already because it's been like 5 years.
The writing is the writing section, or
There
maybe
is a writing section, yeah, yeah. So I found in particular the logic games was hardest for me. Like I really struggled to wrap my mind around that. So I knew I kind of had to focus on that where I knew that the reading comprehension was something I could do okay at. So when it came time to start studying and preparing for the LSAT, the first thing I did was actually take a couple practice tests that I found online, and started trying to identify like what my weak points were and where I needed to focus my time. From there, like lots of people will take a practice course, or a prep course. Some people will get tutors, and then some people sort of prepare on their own. I prepared on my own, and there's lots of fancy, expensive books that you can get to help you do that. What I actually did that seemed to work pretty well was I took out books from my public library and I learned from those. So there was like LSAT for Dummies. I think McGraw-Hill did a good book. So those books are kind of like textbooks. They'll have practice tests and they'll work you through the questions and sort of talk you through how to go about tackling those answers. And I found that was a huge help for me. So I would sort of work through, I'd read them and then I'd try to apply that to more practice tests. And as I did that over time, I could see my score sort of going up. And I did that and it worked okay for me. My LSAT score at the end of the day wasn't amazing. And it depends what law schools you're applying to, how much your LSAT matters. So at Dalhousie, when I was applying, they weighed your GPA 60% and your LSAT 40%. So your GPA was considered a little more important than your LSAT. I had a great GPA. My LSAT was meh. But they kind of balanced out enough that it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, so different schools do it differently. And some people, there are plenty of people who write the LSAT more than once. Always an option. It's offered like 3 or 4 times a year. But I wish I'd known this in advance. The LSAT's actually pretty expensive. It's something like $300 American, which is a lot.
Yeah.
So it's better to put in the time ahead of taking the test and make sure you're actually ready for it, and you're in a spot where you're comfortable with your practice scores before you actually book it would be my recommendation.
Yeah, that's good advice. Thank you so much, Cydney. Thanks for taking the time out today. I know you're probably very busy. So we truly appreciate, getting some insight into your journey and life as an associate lawyer. I don't think we have any time left for any questions, but if people um, have questions later on, or maybe you have questions that weren't answered, feel free to email us at futurelawyershalifax@gmail.com, or you can contact Cydney. She mentioned on LinkedIn, maybe reach out, or her email at ckane@burchells.ca. So yeah, thank you to everyone watching as well for attending our live event. We hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, thanks again, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thanks, Janita, and hopefully I'll hear from some of you in the future.
Yeah,
Take
awesome.
care.
No problem. See ya.